Hello, this is Pastor Don and Pastor Donna Long, and we're here for the Jewish Roots broadcast for this week as we talk about what it means to be, as a Christian, grafted in the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. Donna, you know this is an exciting broadcast all the time as we both were brought up in the Christian faith.
Yes,
you
we were.
Certainly in a Catholic tradition, myself in a Protestant tradition. I went to Sunday school every Sunday of my life. I'm sure you went to catechism and all those kinds of things.
Well, actually, I had religion right in class. I didn't have to go to catechism classes.
You had it all day.
That was part of my subjects. I learned it
That's
right there. Those who went to public school had to go to catechism.
Right. So it was very much a part of our life. So Christmas, Easter, the traditional Christmas Christian holidays were very much a part of who we were. But as we began to look at the Scriptures, we began this journey of understanding that Yeshua was Jewish.
Yes, he is.
Certainly shouldn't be a surprise to us. His mother, Mary, was Jewish. His father was Jewish. The disciples were Jewish. The Apostle Paul was really Rabbi Shaul. He was Jewish.
That's right.
But beyond that, we began to see that much of the teachings of Yeshua in the Gospels requires an understanding of the Judaism out of which they come.
That is correct.
And certainly an understanding of the Tanakh or the Torah or the Old Testament.
That's right.
And I think for both of us, that was kind of like, other than hearing the stories of like Noah and Samson and David and Goliath, we really didn't understand the Jewish roots of the Christian faith.
No, not at all. I think we had more of that Greek mindset.
I think
not the Hebraic mindset.
I think we did. And so we are in a season now, we just finished going through Passover for most people in the Christian church. They've celebrated Easter.
Yes.
But I want to take this time in this broadcast this week to look back at some of the things we discovered, not that we were originally discovering that, other people who understand their Jewish roots certainly taught us these things. But the understanding of what's behind the Passover.
Yes.
Now, I think to begin with, to say, well, why as Christians are we even looking at the Passover? That is the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples was the Passover meal.
Yes, it was.
And so all that is embodied in that we have traditionalized now with the cup and the bread, and we call it communion or the Lord's Supper or the Last Supper, but it really was a Passover meal.
It sure was. It was one of the feasts.
And Paul, in fact, talks about celebrating Passover and uses analogies from the Passover to explain the Christian life.
That's right.
So as we begin to look at Passover, we can discover some of the richness.
That's right.
A Passover is not a Jewish festival.
No, it is not. It's a God's festival.
It's God's festival. That's what God calls it.
That's right. It's my feast. It's my appointed day.
So one of the things I think we traditionally, I think we know the story, our listeners probably, many of them, know the story of the 10 plagues that came into Egypt, each one, Moses saying to Pharaoh, let my people go. And it culminated in the last plague, which was the slaying of the firstborn, man and animal alike, and that the Jewish people, the Israelis, were commanded by God to to sacrifice a lamb and to mark the doorpost of their house with the blood.
Yes.
And that when the angel of death came, the way we heard it was, the angel of death would pass over, and that's what Passover is all about, the angel of death passing over or skipping over their houses. But you know, when we begin to look at ancient Near East customs.
We uncovered a lot of good things,
Well,
didn't we?
you know, we find out that when God said things to people, they didn't need to go have someone teach them what it meant.
We think that when he said it, it's like they went, oh, this is the first time I'm ever hearing this, and it is not true. He spoke to them about things they already had knowledge of.
You know, Sabbath is like that.
The Sabbath is exactly one of them, because he says, remember the Sabbath. Well, if you're going to remember it, then it's something you already knew about previously.
So when they were at Mount Sinai and he said, remember the Sabbath, they didn't say, oh, what's a Sabbath?
No.
Gee, we got to change our schedules, and what day is it, and keep it.
That's right.
But he said, remember the Sabbath, because he had already taught the people.
That's correct.
They already knew from the creation story that the seventh day
was his day.
was his day. They already
That's right.
knew that.
They already knew that.
Well, so it is in Passover.
That's correct.
You know, when Moses says, we're going to kill the Passover, they didn't say, what's a Passover?
Nope.
They knew exactly what it is, and that's what we want to share with
That's right.
you who are listening today. So, you know, get some notepads out, take some notes. This is a subject that will really be exciting to you, especially as we come to understand what it means for us today. You know, we can begin, Donna, I think, by looking at ancient covenants.
Yes.
And
something that we in America, we don't have a grasp on covenant. We really, really don't.
And what
not like they do.
Right. And what were those ancient covenants?
Those ancient covenants were. Do you want me to, like, are you meaning how they did it? Usually
well, they were called blood
They were
covenants.
called blood covenants because blood had to be shed. And they were binding. I mean, they were like eternally binding. And I mean, a lot of times we think of them that they would do like with the finger or slit here or something. But usually it was on the arm that they would make a cut. And then they would mingle their bloods together. And sometimes they would even put it in a cup or something, mix it with water, and each party would drink the blood as well. But definitely they would put their arms together and they would mingle their bloods together, and then they would rub something into that wound that would mark that, so that would leave a scar, so that whenever they lifted up their sleeve, anyone around observing them saw that and knew they were in covenant with someone.
Now this is not just a Hebrew tradition.
No,
this
it is
is a worldwide tradition. If we go from civilization starting in the Middle East and spreading out,
that's right.
Even the American Indians, for example, had blood covenants.
They had blood covenants, that's correct.
And if you were a blood covenant brother with a red-skinned man, he would defend you at the cost of his life. You would defend him at the cost of your life.
That's right. You exchanged everything. I mean, you exchanged your weapons, you exchanged your coat, which was your sign of authority and all that. And they were binding. They were binding for death. And I think that you happen to mention in our service, our service here on Sabbath, that it was when they saw the mark, what they first thought of was, who is his covenant partner?
Yes, right.
Because if it was just some little wimpy guy down the street, it was like, we can do whatever we want to you. But if they knew it was some big, strong, influential person, then they might think twice about doing any harm to that person. So it's the important question is, who are you in covenant with?
Who are you in covenant with?
Who is your covenant partner?
So in our culture, we don't understand covenants. No. We don't enter into covenants. We are a legalistic society that enters into contracts. We sign.
And find loopholes of how to break them.
That's right. Then we try to find loopholes. Right. We put our signature on a piece of paper, but what's the value of the signature?
Right. That's right.
Very few people in a Western culture understand that their name is as good as their word, or the word is as good as their name. The Amish people, for example, if you shake a hand with an Amish man on an agreement, you don't need anything written.
It's binding for him.
And the Amish people have a history that they will honor that even if it costs them to honor it.
That's right.
Well, blood covenants in the world, in Africa and the Near East, blood covenants were like that. When you entered into a blood covenant, you didn't do it casually because it meant everything you have is mine, everything I have is yours.
That's right. And I'm going to protect you with my life.
That's right.
That's what it meant.
So if I'm your covenant partner and someone attacks you,
your enemies are my enemies.
Your enemies are mine, and I will fight to the death to protect you.
Well, actually, their mindset was that they were bound by the fact that they were in covenant with that person. Whether they liked it or not was never an issue. It was never, they didn't ever hesitate to say, well, do I really want to do? No, they knew they were bound because they respected the concept of covenant so much so that it was never hesitation. It was like, I will give my life.
In fact, if I as a family member was in covenant with somebody and refused to act out my covenant responsibility, my own family would kill me.
You. That's right.
Because in the society, blood covenant is so vital.
That's right.
It is so eternal. It is so unbreakable that it runs throughout the Mideast.
And they spoke that covenant to each other. As they did this, they spoke the terms of the covenant to each other. And so, of course, the family would kill them. Why? Because they were no longer trustworthy. If they wouldn't even keep a covenant, then what else would they not keep? So it's like their life would end.
So as you said, that covenant was a mark on the arm. So if I'm angry at somebody and I'm ready to do them bodily harm, and the man rolls up his sleeve and I see that scar,
That's right.
You're right. My first question is, who is his covenant partner?
That's right. That's right.
Because it might be somebody I don't want to mess with.
That is correct.
And I think on this past Sabbath when we were teaching this, I came across, I think it's in the notes there.
Yes,
Isaiah.
it is.
Why don't you read that for us?
Isaiah 52:10, it says, "The Lord will lay bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God." Now, how many times have people, even in our viewing audience, read that and really not understood that that was talking covenant?
Oh, I didn't,
I never knew that
I
until
thought,
we uncovered the richness of this threshold covenant, and then there's the firstborn covenant. There's so many covenants. But when we saw this, it's like you just pass over so many things there. But when you start getting a revelation at the roots of things, you begin looking through the Word with different eyes. So many things open up, and it's like, oh my goodness, let me look. Is this mean the same? And you go and you look into the Hebrew or the Greek word, and you find out it's the very same word. And that's what that was a covenant term that was being spoken in Isaiah.
I thought that it said,
It
when
was
he
the
laid
blood
bare
covenant.
his arm just means he's strong. But what it means is when the nations come against Israel, there's coming a time.
Yeah, he's going to show you his muscles.
He's going to roll up his sleeve, and you're going to see the sign of his covenant with his people, meaning he personally
That's what he means.
is going to defend
But
Israel.
how many of us just thought, well, he's going to roll up his sleeve and he's going to flex his muscles, and it doesn't mean that at all. It means something a lot more powerful than that.
Right.
A lot more powerful than that.
So covenants then are essential to understanding the
Yes.
Bible. To understand Christianity, if you don't understand covenants, then what you've got is a religion, but you may not have a life-changing relationship with the eternal God,
That's
because
correct.
He is a covenant God.
He is a covenant God.
So today we're going to begin to look at ancient threshold covenants.
Yes.
Donna, in the ancient world, the home was the place of worship.
That's right,
They
it
didn't have
was.
synagogues and churches and temples and all that, but in the ancient world, the home was the first place of religious
Of
worship.
religious worship, that's correct.
The husband was the head of the house, was the priest of that covenant, and sacrifices were made at the altar.
That's right.
And the altar was the threshold. And that then became the place where anything you were going to do in a sacrificial way took place in that altar. And what they in that threshold, what they would do is, especially if it was a stone threshold,
That's right.
is that they would cut out or carve out a basin
That's right.
into the stone.
That's right.
And if they were going to sacrifice a lamb, for example, that lamb would be sacrificed at the threshold.
That's right.
And the blood would be drained into that basin.
the
And
natural
the
basin in the
threshold
stone.
itself then would be covered with blood. And one of the ways they used this was they established the fact that when you cross a threshold, you are crossing a bloodline.
That's right. And you're entering into covenant with that family.
With that family. So if I were to come into your house and I step over that blood-stained threshold,
That's right.
I have now entered into your family. I have become part of your family.
It's almost like being adopted into the family.
That's right.
For that time when you come in there.
That's right. And so in fact, if I were to invite someone to come to my house who was a person I wanted to honor, before they arrived at my house, I would sacrifice an animal
correct.
on the threshold
That's right.
to welcome them in.
That's right.
The greater honor I wanted to give them,
That's right.
the more costly the sacrifice.
That's right. In other words, the value of that sacrifice immediately was understood by the person that you invited, how much you valued him.
How much I value
If it was some little frog, it's like, oh, they must not value me very much. But if it was a lamb or an oxen or something like that, then they knew you have very high esteem for me. You're honoring me.
I might have a relative coming from another nation or coming
That's
to
right.
visit, and I sacrifice a turtle dove or something like that.
Right.
But I've got the head of the village or a neighboring village
That's
coming to
right.
visit me, I might sacrifice a lamb. I've got the king coming.
There we go.
I might sacrifice a bull.
bull, that's right.
So that but what I did clearly was I demonstrated that I was honoring my guest by offering a sacrifice
That's right.
on that threshold.
And this was common. I mean, this was like common practice. It's not like once in a great while, once a year, we might do something like this. This was a common thing. That's why the basin was cut right out of that threshold, because this was the culture. Covenants were very important.
Well,
to
you know,
them.
and people may think, well, that's way back in ancient times, but I think we have something on the notes here about General Grant.
Grant.
Why don't you read that for us? It's from a
Okay.
book on threshold covenants.
Yes, and it says, when General Grant was at Asiut on the Upper Nile during his journey around the world, he was doubly welcomed as a guest by the American Vice Consul, who was a native of Egypt. A bullock was sacrificed at the steamer landing, and its head was laid on one side of the gangplank and his body on the other side. The outpoured blood was between the head and the body under the gangplank, so that in stepping from the steamer to the shore, General Grant would cross over it. When he reached the house of the vice consul, a sheep was similarly sacrificed at the threshold, now again at the threshold, in such a way that General Grant passed over the blood and entering into that person's house.
Now, we're looking at the late 1800s when
That's
that was
right.
taking
That's
place.
right.
And nobody thought, whoa, that's strange or that's
No.
unheard of.
No.
But in Egypt, that vice consul was demonstrating that the man who's coming into my domain,
That's right.
into my territory, and then into my house is a man of great value.
That's right.
So I sacrifice a bull at the steamer landing. And
right.
in order for General Grant to come into his territory, now he's
Even
got
into his territory. Now at that shore, that was the threshold of his territory.
That's right.
Okay, so thresholds are a very, very, very important thing.
But everybody therefore knew. Everybody who watched that happen, every Egyptian who was
That's
there
right,
that day,
that witnessed that.
knew that the man who's coming to step over that
That's right.
is
someone
very,
of
very
great value.
important.
That's right.
And then when General Grant gets to his house, then again, there's a second
Likewise.
sacrifice
That's right.
as he steps over the threshold.
Into his personal home.
You know, the culture of the threshold covenant was so strong that you would never enter someone's house stepping over the threshold if you meant them harm.
That's right. Never.
A thief
No.
or a robber or a
No.
murderer
That's
would
right.
never cross a threshold and go in and murder somebody.
But now what does that tell you? I mean, even a thief understood the binding terms
Of
that covenant.
Right.
I mean, here they are. They intend to do ill and harm to this family, but they won't cross over that threshold
To do it.
And what we have shared, we haven't shared with this audience, but we've shared with the Saturday's audience that you shared about that person that came and they wondered why the tent door was
Yes,
wide
that was-
open.
That was in Saudi Arabia,
Saudi Arabia.
where a traveler noticed that the sheikh's tent, the front door of the tent was wide open, and there were no guards there.
That's right.
But the guards were posted at
the
the back
back
of the
of the
tent,
tent.
where there's no opening.
That's right.
And the answer was very simple. Nobody would cross the threshold of
right.
the entrance into that tent to do harm to the sheik.
That's right.
But they might rip a hole in the back.
Or dig under.
Dig under or
That's
something
right.
like that.
Because they knew not to cross over that threshold. Now, it's still like that in Israel today. When we were there, unfortunately, the Fogel family, that we were at their home, the Arab terrorist that came in and slaughtered that entire family, he did not enter through the door.
Right. There were actually two of them.
Yes, there were two of them. They did not enter through the door. They know about that. He would not come through that door, because if you enter in through the doorway, you're going over that threshold, and what you're doing is you're saying, I vow to protect this family. I am in covenant with them. I am adopted into their family, and I am now vowed to protect them and to keep them safe as they are with me. So the Arab terrorists came in through the window. I mean, it's just amazing. So it's not some kind of an ancient covenant practice from long ago. It's still prevalent today. The understanding of that is still prevalent in the East.
So in other words, if a man meant to kill someone and he stepped over the threshold, went in and murdered him, his own clan now will kill him.
They will. They will.
Because he's broken a society's understanding
Of an eternal covenant.
of a covenant, of a threshold covenant. The threshold is sacred.
That's right.
It's a sacred place.
That's right.
Now, I mean, that's quite amazing. The key then to all of this is that to enter across a threshold is to get into covenant with those on the inside.
That's right.
That's quite an amazing thing. Well, let's take that and see now if we can apply that to what was going on in Passover. It was quite amazing. Exodus chapter 12, verse 21. Why don't you read that for us, Don?
It says, Then Moses summoned all of the elders of Israel and said to them, Go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. But lamb was not there. Our translations say lamb, but it did not say. It's actually read, select the animal for your families and slaughter the Passover.
That's right. If you look in the Hebrew,
That's right.
there and most modern Bibles,
That's right.
by the way, put the lamb in there.
That's right.
But they put it in italics to indicate it's not
That it's
there.
not part of the
Well, why are they
verse.
putting it there? Because, we all know it's the Passover lamb, thinking of how we traditionally
That's right.
thought of
That's right.
Passover. But what Moses said literally was, slaughter the Passover or the crossover.
That's right.
Now,
What he was saying is, you're going to make a threshold covenant.
now, isn't that interesting? Because he didn't
That's
have to
exactly.
explain it to people.
No, he did not.
He did not say, I want you to get a lamb, slaughter it as a Passover.
That's right.
And they say,
What is
what's
a Passover?
What's a Passover?
What's a Passover? They knew, and it was two words. It was pass with a dash over. It was two words, and it was the word for threshold covenant.
Right. So they immediately heard
covenant.
threshold covenant.
They immediately heard that.
Now, when they heard that, what they would have heard, Donna, is that somebody is coming.
That's right.
I mean, if we were doing that today and I were out of state and I called you and said, look, I'll be home this afternoon, but I want you to prepare the Passover.
Yes.
You would know I'm bringing somebody
Somebody of
home with me
importance.
who's important, and we're going to have a sacrifice. Cultures today, some of them put salt, which is
That's
a
right,
symbol
which
of
is a
blood.
symbol of blood,
And they
that's right.
sprinkle salt on their doorpost. But I would have, by saying that, indicated to you that somebody's coming to dinner and is going to enter into covenant with us.
And we need to honor him.
And so when Moses gathered the people and said, you need to slaughter the Passover, they immediately had this image.
right.
We are about to have someone cross our threshold and enter into covenant
with us.
with us. Well, verse 23, let me read that. It says, when the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the doorframe and will pass over that doorway,
That's right.
and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your house. Now, the Amplified Bible says the Lord will pass over the door. The Message Bible says he will pass over the doorway. The Hebrew literally is the word Pesach,
Pesach, right.
the
where we
door
get
from which we get Pesach.
Yep.
And that word is talking about a threshold. It's very
right.
clearly saying that
That is one of the translations of
right.
Pesach,
Pe-
is threshold.
that he's going to do that.
That's right.
In fact, in 1 Kings, that story when Elijah's talking about the people and they want to serve Baal and they want to serve God and they're
That's
going
right.
back and forth.
That's right.
I always learned it as, and he said, how long will you halt between two opinions?
Two opinions or two decisions, right?
Then we made it
That's
more modern. We said, how
That's
long
right.
will you be caught between two decisions?
That's right.
But what does it really say in the Hebrew?
What it really says, how long will you halt between or cross over two thresholds?
How long will you cross over two thresholds?
Between two thresholds.
How long will you...
That's what it means when you look it up.
You're crossing over a threshold to serve Baal
That's
and
right.
be in covenant with him, and then you
Yep.
come and you cross over a threshold and into God's temple,
That's
how long
right.
are you going to be trying to cross over two thresholds?
2 thresholds, which you can't do.
Well,
You
that
can't.
certainly speaks a lot to us today
That's
about,
right.
as Christians, we go into church and we want to cross into the blessings of our faith in Christ, but then we go
Then
into
we
the
go back
world
and
and
we
we
cross
cross over
over into the world's threshold.
the
That's right.
world's covenants, the
That's
world's
right.
way of thinking.
That's right.
And how long will you do both of those? But the word there is it's a threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they understood on that Passover
Yes.
was someone important,
Very important was
is
coming.
coming in Egypt.
That's
It
right.
is Yahweh, it is
That's right.
God.
That's right.
That you need to prepare your doorway, your
Yes.
threshold,
That's right.
for him to enter. And the fact that he's going to enter into that means you're about to enter into a threshold covenant. Donna, it doesn't get any more personal than that.
No, it does not. No, it does not.
I mean, God could have said, listen, I'm going to go through and I'm going to kill all the firstborn.
Right.
He didn't need a sign
No.
to know which are his people and
right,
which
he
are not.
knew
He
which were.
knew.
That's right.
But he wanted to do more than simply say, I'm dealing with Egypt and their firstborn, the idolatry of the firstborn.
That's right.
I am also starting a brand new thing with Israel.
That's right.
And I'm going to enter into a covenant. Well, he could have said to Moses, listen, bring all the people together, get them over here in a stadium, and now they're all safe here as a mass of, 600,000 men, 3 million people. Get them over here, I'll protect them. Now, he did that with the
He did it
curse
with
of
all,
darkness,
right?
for
He did it with
example.
every single one of the plagues.
Right.
The plagues were all around them, but they weren't touching them in the
Right,
midst of it.
right.
So he did know which
He
ones were
protected
his.
a community like
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
But when it comes to the threshold covenant,
That's personal.
God
That was
says,
each individual, because they had to really know that
Absolutely.
lamb too, and they had that lamb in their house, and they had to get to know that lamb and
Right.
and take care of that lamb and everything, and it became a personal symbol to them.
so what happened that night was God was entering into a family covenant with the families individually.
That's right.
He was going to come and cross over a blood-marked threshold
That's right.
and step into their house.
That's right.
In other words, entering in to be in covenant with them. And the first act he was going to do as their covenant partner was to protect them
That's right.
from the angel of death.
Hallelujah.
Well, we're going to have to pick this
Yes,
up in
we'll
our
have to
next
pick it
week's
up again next
broadcast.
week.
There's so much we can share in this, but it all applies to you. We're
Yes,
glad
it
you
does.
joined us. We look forward to seeing you next week here on Grafted In as we consider the Jewish roots of our Christian